In a quiet Virginia town where time moved slower and the world seemed to keep spinning in place, a single night would shake everything to its core. It wasn't the sound of sirens that broke the stillness, nor a crime scene. It was something more insidious, a confrontation born from assumption, and a man who refused to bow to it. General Victor Hale, 55 years old, a decorated three-star general in the United States Army, was en route to Fort Bragg for a high-level strategic briefing. After hours behind the wheel, he pulled into Ruby's Diner, a small roadside stop just off the I-95, seeking a quiet meal and a moment to collect his thoughts. Tall and commanding, silver at his temples, his dress blues were spotless, his chest lined with medals earned in places most Americans only read about. When he entered the diner, the doorbell chimed gently. A few truckers glanced up. The family paused mid-bite, but no one stared for long. He ordered a cheeseburger and a black coffee, his demeanor calm, humble. In this booth, in this modest establishment, he was just another traveler passing through. But outside, in the dimly lit parking lot, two police officers, Dean Foster and Nick Holland, watched his every move. V. Foster squinted at the military plates. "Nice car for a place like this," he muttered. Holland, younger and smug, nodded. "Looks like someone playing someone. They didn't verify the license plate. They didn't call it in. They just stared, itching for a reason to act. To them, he didn't belong. And they had no idea the storm they were about to unleash." Officers Dean Foster and Nick Holland leaned casually against their cruiser, sipping burnt coffee and scanning the nearly empty parking lot like they were guarding state secrets. When their eyes landed on the tall black man in military blues exiting the diner, something shifted behind V. Foster's furrowed brow. "That uniform's a bit much for a pit stop," V. Foster grunted, narrowing his eyes. "Looks like he's playing dress up." Holland smirked. "Military plates, sure, but a black guy with that many stars doesn't feel right." They didn't check the license plate, didn't radio dispatch, didn't run his ID. What they did was far more dangerous. They trusted their bias. To them, a black man in a high-ranking uniform wasn't a soldier. He was a story they couldn't believe, and they decided, in that moment, to act on that disbelief. Inside the diner, General Hale had just paid his bill and stepped out into the cool evening air, his breath visible in the orange glow of the streetlights. His mind was already on the long road south. He didn't see the officers straighten, didn't hear the click of boots against asphalt until one voice sliced through the quiet. "Hey, you freeze." He paused, slowly raising his hands where they could be seen. The tone wasn't one of curiosity. It was command soaked in suspicion. And in that moment, Hale knew this wasn't about law. This was about perception. And perception, in the wrong hands, could be deadly. General Victor Hale kept his voice steady, forged in decades of battlefield command. "Good evening, officers," he said calmly, both hands visible. "Is there a problem?" V. Foster stepped in close, flashlight beam harsh against Hale's eyes. "Nice costume," he sneered, letting the light linger on the general's stars and medals. "Mind telling me where you got it?" Hale's jaw tightened slightly. "It's not a costume. I'm Lieutenant General Victor Hale, United States Army." Holland began circling, a smirk playing on his lips. "A general, huh? That's a big title. Got any ID to back up that bedtime story?" Hale nodded. "Left pocket. My wallet." "I'm reaching slowly." V. Foster's hand hovered over his holster. "Do it slow. Real slow." Hale complied with military precision, pulling out his wallet with 2 fingers and handing it over. Holland grabbed it, scanned the contents, then tossed it to V. Foster with a shrug. "Could be fake." You don't look like any general I've ever met," V. Foster added, voice laced with contempt. Hale didn't flinch. "How many black generals have you met, officer? Or is it that I don't fit the poster in your head?" The crowd outside Ruby's Diner had started to grow. A few people had their phones up recording. Still, V. Foster's pride was pricked. His face turned red, not with shame but with challenge. "Don't get smart with me," he barked. "Hands on the car. Now." Hale didn't move. "I'm not resisting. But you have no lawful reason to detain me." That was all it took. In a flash, V. Foster lunged. He grabbed Hale's arm, yanked it behind his back, and slammed the general face first onto the hood of the rental car. The cold metal bit through the uniform. A second later, steel cuffs snapped around his wrists. "You're under arrest," V. Foster hissed. "Impersonating an officer. Resisting arrest." "But you didn't see that coming, General." Holland chuckled as he opened the cruiser door. "Hope the view's nice from the backseat." But Hale didn't struggle. He didn't yell. He just turned his head slightly and said, voice quiet but firm, "There's a number in my phone, labeled Pentagon. Call it now, or regret it later." V. Foster laughed. Saved the bluff for the judge. But outside, the crowd was no longer silent. And justice, once again, was watching. The holding room at the Greystone police station was as cold and indifferent as the treatment General Hale received. The walls were bare, the overhead light flickered with a faint buzz, and the metal chair beneath him creaked with every slight movement. His wrists were still cuffed, chained to a scratched metal table. The uniform that once commanded respect now seemed invisible to the men who arrested him. Across the room, officers V. Foster and Holland lounged by the door, arrogance thick in the air. V. Foster sipped his coffee like a man who had already won. Holland scrolled through his phone, smirking. "This guy's probably got a fake ID generator in his basement," he muttered. V. Foster chuckled. "You know the type. Smooth talker. Probably been scamming VFW halls for free drinks since the Bush administration." They had no idea that the man in front of them had sat in classified briefings with 4-star generals, that he had led missions in the dead of night across foreign soil, and that his signature had once set entire battalions into motion. But Hale didn't respond. He didn't glare. He didn't speak. His back remained straight, his eyes focused on the clock ticking slowly toward midnight. He had seen worse. He had endured worse. But never on his own soil. Never from the very people sworn to uphold the law. Still, he waited. Because he knew what was coming. And when it arrived, these men wouldn't just be embarrassed, they would be exposed. When the station chief finally allowed a single phone call more out of irritation than decency, General Hale didn't hesitate. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't call a friend. He reached into his mind and recalled the number burned there from years of high-level operations. He spoke calmly, each button pressed deliberate. "Office of the Deputy Secretary," answered a sharp, no-nonsense voice. "This is Lieutenant General Victor Hale. I need Secretary Harrington. Priority 1, he said, his voice cutting through the stale air like a blade. The room went still. Officers V. Foster and Holland exchanged glances, the amusement fading from their faces. A pause. Then, "Yes, sir. Connecting now." What followed was a silence so thick it threatened to smother the room. Then, like a thunderclap, a commanding voice filled the space. "Hale, where the hell are you? And why am I getting a call in the middle of the night from a 3-star general using a landline?" Calm but firm, Hale replied, "Greystone Police Department, detained without cause. Accused of impersonating an officer, cuffed. No verification, no protocol." The temperature in the room dropped. "Who am I speaking to right now?" came the icy voice. Chief Landon, swallowing hard, stammered. "Chief Ed Landon, Mom. You've got a decorated general in custody. A man who's led missions that protected this nation. You arrested him because your officers couldn't read a military ID. Because he didn't match their idea of power. Release him. Now. Or MPs will be at your door in 30 minutes. And the governor will get a call before the hour's up. Am I clear?" No one moved. No one breathed. Then, in a flurry of panic, Landon turned to Holland. "Get the cuffs off him now." Keys fumbled. Metal clanged. And General Hale stood tall, rubbing his wrists slowly, his eyes sweeping across every man in the room. The power had shifted and everyone knew it. The room felt colder now, as if the walls themselves recoiled from the weight of the truth. Chief Landon stood frozen, his face pale and drawn. Across from him, Foster and Holland looked like 2 schoolboys caught cheating on an exam, but this was no classroom. This was the undoing of a lie they'd built with arrogance and blind prejudice. General Hale adjusted his cuffs with slow precision. Every motion he made was a reminder of rank, of dignity, of everything they had chosen to ignore. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. His voice, when it finally came, was calm and devastating. "This wasn't a mistake," he said, eyes locked on Landon. "A mistake is forgetting a name, missing a detail. What happened here was a decision, a conscious choice to ignore my ID, my uniform, and my humanity. You didn't fail your protocol. You failed your principles. The silence that followed was unbearable. V. Foster looked down at his boots, the smugness drained from his face. Holland leaned back against the wall, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Their fellow officers watched from the hallway, stunned, some ashamed, others silently reevaluating everything they thought they knew about power and appearance. Landon handed back the general's wallet with a trembling hand. General, we're sorry. Deeply. We didn't realize. You didn't want to realize, Hale cut in. You saw a black man in a uniform and chose to believe it was fake. That says more about you than it ever could about me. With that, General Victor Hale turned and walked out of the Greystone police station. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The message had already been delivered, and it would echo in those halls long after his footsteps faded. By morning, the quiet town of Greystone was anything but quiet. The clip, just 90 seconds of grainy footage showing a black general slammed onto a patrol car, was already viral. It had spread across TikTok, X, and Instagram like wildfire. Hashtags like Justice for Hale, General Not Suspect, and Dignity in Uniform trended within hours. News anchors picked it up next. Local stations aired it on loop. National outlets followed, their headlines searing. 3-star general wrongfully arrested by Greystone police. Hero humiliated from battlefield to bias. Even international press began echoing the story. Jenny, the waitress from Ruby's Diner, became an unlikely voice of truth. In an interview on the diner's front steps, still wearing her apron, she looked straight into the camera and said, "That man was kind, respectful, and more decorated than anyone I've ever met. I watched him get treated like a criminal just because of how he looked. That's not policing. That's prejudice." She became a hero in her own right, praised for speaking up when so many had stayed silent. Her video interview, raw and unscripted, garnered millions of views. People weren't just angry. They were moved. Signs began appearing in front yards and storefronts. "We stand with Hale." Candlelight vigils formed across military bases. Veterans, black, white, and brown, posted photos in uniform, tagging their locations with the words, "Would they believe me?" The story wasn't just about one man anymore. It was about all the moments like his that had gone unseen. General Hale had become more than a name, he was a symbol. A reminder that even those who served at the highest level could be brought low, not by enemies of the nation, but by the ignorance within its borders. And this time the nation was watching. The fallout was swift and unprecedented. Within 48 hours, the Department of Justice launched a formal investigation into the Greystone Police Department. But that was just the beginning. The Secretary of Defense called for a joint task force with the Pentagon and the Department of Justice to examine patterns of racial profiling against black service members across the country. From Fort Bragg to San Diego, from small towns to urban centers, stories began flooding in accounts of soldiers questioned, detained, and disrespected not for what they did, but for who they were and how they looked. General Victor Hale hadn't asked to be the face of a movement, but he didn't shy away from it either. His calm defiance, his unwavering dignity in the face of humiliation, had struck a chord far deeper than a single viral moment. He became a symbol not just of military honor, but of the quiet power of truth. Military bases began hosting forums, schools added curriculum about modern civil rights issues, and police departments in multiple states announced revisions to their bias training protocols. What started as a disgraceful act in a diner parking lot had grown into a national conversation, a moment of clarity for a country still wrestling with its reflection. Reporters hounded the Greystone precinct. Protesters gathered not with rage, but with resolve, holding candles, carrying signs that read, "Respect the uniform. Respect the person." Veterans across the country wrote open letters, published essays, and showed up to city halls demanding change. And in the heart of it all stood General Hale, silent, steady, and unbending. He had been tested not on the battlefield but at home. And through him, the country was learning that the fight for justice did not end with a war abroad but continued with courage at home. Change didn't come easily to Greystone, but it came. Officers Foster and Holland were officially suspended pending a full federal inquiry. Their past misconduct, once buried under paperwork and silence, was unearthed and laid bare before the public. Community outrage turned into collective momentum. The mayor, under immense pressure, announced his resignation during a hastily called press conference, citing a failure of leadership and trust. In the vacuum left behind, something unexpected happened. Jenny, the young waitress from Ruby's diner who had stood up, who had filmed, who had refused to back down, became a local hero. Her courage ignited something in the town that no election or policy ever could. And it was her testimony that inspired the town council to take an unprecedented step. They appointed a new chief of police, Commander Denise Ford, a seasoned reformer from Philadelphia known for dismantling old power structures and building trust where it had been lost. Her first address to the Greystone community wasn't from behind a podium, but on the sidewalk outside the police station, where she simply said, "We're not here to control, we're here to serve. That starts now." Under her leadership, Greystone began to reshape itself. The police department was overhauled. Community advisory boards were formed, including veterans, teachers, students, and even former critics of law enforcement. Bias training was no longer optional, it was mandatory. Schools introduced new civic education programs focusing on justice, empathy, and civil rights history. Churches and community centers opened their doors for weekly town talks, places where stories were shared and healing began. And while General Victor Hale never returned to Greystone, his presence lingered. His story became part of the curriculum. His portrait, once mistaken for a fraud, now hung in the town library under a simple inscription: "Honor is not claimed, it is lived." The road was long, and the wounds deep, but for the first time in a long time, the people of Greystone weren't afraid to face the truth. They knew the work wasn't done, but they had finally begun. General Victor Hale never returned to Greystone, not because of bitterness, but because his presence was no longer needed there. The town had learned its lesson. His story had become part of its history, etched into the conscience of a community once blind to its own flaws. Instead, he turned his energy toward what mattered most: mentoring. At Fort Bragg and beyond, he took young officers under his wing, particularly those who, like him, had been doubted, dismissed, or overlooked. He taught not only strategy and discipline, but dignity. He reminded them that leadership wasn't about rank, it was about purpose. To a young black captain who once asked, "How do you move forward after something like that?" he answered simply, "You don't just move forward, you walk like the ground belongs to you. You live like your light can't be dimmed." His words traveled farther than any battalion. They became a mantra whispered in military halls, echoed in classrooms, quoted at protests, and passed from mentor to mentee like a sacred oath. Greystone became a footnote in his life, a painful but powerful chapter. But the real story was still being written, across cities and small towns, wherever someone chose courage over silence, and truth over comfort. And through it all, Victor Hale remained what he had always been: not just a general of the United States Army, but a general of hope. This isn't just a story about injustice, it's a wake-up call for a society too used to looking away. It asks every viewer of this video, what do you think about what happened to this black general? Do you believe justice was truly served? Share your thoughts in the comments, because conversation is the beginning of change. And let's ask this together: how long will it take before racial prejudice is erased from law enforcement? 5 years, 25 years, or only when we stop being indifferent? Justice doesn't run on autopilot, it needs the courage of people like you to stay alive. From this story, we learn that justice never arrives on its own, and dignity is not something granted by others, it is something we must defend every single day. The unwavering stance of someone like Victor Hale reminds us that silence is often complicity, and sometimes it takes just one voice, raised at the right moment, to force an entire system to confront itself. If you were in his position as a father, a general, or simply a witness, what would you do next? Would you stay silent or choose to act? And the final question for all of us: by the year 2050, will racism truly be over? The answer doesn't lie in time, it lies in the choices we make, starting today. Note: this story is entirely fictional and created for the purpose of raising awareness. It highlights issues of responsibility, justice, and the importance of treating everyone with respect and dignity. We firmly oppose violence, prejudice, and injustice in all forms. Viewer discretion is advised.